What is up, my YouTube family? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, then it's just welcome to my channel. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button because you will not be disappointed. Or maybe you will. Not everybody has good taste, you know. Let me tell you something. Bella thinks she runs this here. Having a male dog and a female dog is completely different. I never would have thought so, but it is. Blue is like a mama's boy. He's so sweet, cuddly, kind, and just clingy, honestly, which I don't have a problem with. But Bella is like baby boss, okay? She is a handful. She likes to fuss at him. She likes to try to fuss at me. You might see one or two of them walking around in the background just because I've wasted so much of my time before filming. They've been sleeping like the last hour and a half, and I did not capitalize on that. And so Bella is up. Alright, we got a lot of ground to cover today, so I'm not going to waste no time. Today's video is about Peter Sutcliffe, aka the Yorkshire Ripper. Peter was a bad boy, okay? A very bad boy. But when you put together serial killer and Gemini, like, he is genuinely what I would expect you to come up with. So let's talk about it, shall we? Peter was born in, I believe it's pronounced Bingley, Yorkshire, England, on June 2nd of 1946. So like I previously stated, sis is a Gemini, and a Gemini he is. Peter is born into a working class Catholic family, and he is described as being pretty much the same throughout his entire childhood. A loner, as well as a strange and lost child. Peter does not do so well in school, and quite frankly, by the age of 15, he just gets tired of the school thing. And so he decides he's going to drop out and just find him a little job. Take life from there. Now he finds himself a couple of little menial jobs here and there, but one that particularly interested him and that he was extremely excited about was being a grave digger. Now it was not about a fascination with like death or graveyards, anything spooky, and none of the things like that. The job is really just you digging rectangles in the ground, child. It's not about to expose you to anything more sinister than that. See, as a grave digger, he develops or realizes that he has this unhealthy fascination and obsession with the ladies of the night. And so while he was out there on his little shift, he would watch them walk up and down the street conducting their business. Peter is not the most popular amongst his peers because he is very well known for making very morbid and distasteful jokes that did not often land well with his peers. Despite the fact that Peter really likes his job as a gravedigger, it is not long before he is off to the next position with the next company. At every job that Peter worked at, his social status was pretty much the same. Nobody ever really liked him. A lot of people thought he was very strange and uncomfortable to be around. They just saw him overall as a very strange young man, child. He was strange acting, strange looking. He had this strange aura, strange energy about himself. Very much given weekend pass from an asylum. And he always appeared to be staring off into space, just completely lost in his thoughts. Thoughts that, by the look of him, were more than likely very disturbing. He was just always given psychopath, and most people avoided him at all costs. They wanted nothing to do with him. Some people did not even like making eye contact with the man. That's how eerie his whole demeanor was. And it wasn't that they feared him or felt like he might harm someone. He was extremely unconfrontational, which was to the point where that was even strange. In one instance, he is down to the bar minding his strange business, having himself a drink or two and staring off into space, when a very belligerent and intoxicated man that was also at the bar drinking attempts to gain his attention by taunting him and teasing him and making fun of him. But Peter would not respond. It is as if he is completely oblivious that it is even going on at all, that the man is talking to him, which is very obvious that he was. Now, when this man fails to gain the attention of little old Peter, he decides to take it a step further and pours a pint of beer over little Peter's head. And still, Peter has no reaction whatsoever. Now, despite how unappealing and awkward and strange that Peter appears to most who encounter him, this was not the experience of a local woman by the name of Sonia Sermon. Sonia sees him as a kind-natured man who is just probably and most likely misunderstood. Now, quiet as it's kept, there were some reports that said Miss Girl was a little bit mentally disturbed upstairs. Like she just was not all there. A couple of cars short of a full deck. And that is why she was drawn to him and she didn't see anything wrong with him. But I like to believe that there's just somebody out here for everybody. And maybe that was it. Maybe she was his person. Whatever the case is, she likes Peter and he likes her back. And they begin to date. The two began dating in 1967 when he is just 21 years old, and they married 7 years later. Now, during those 7 years, Peter has worked to build a relatively normal life. He has become a husband. He is a friend to one or two people. He's held down a steady job working as a truck driver for a lot of this time, but he has always maintained his very strange, peculiar, eerie disposition. But see, working as a truck driver, it's just you in the truck most times, and so there was nobody else there for him to spook or bother. It was just him alone in his truck. Sonia is unable to bear him any children, and whether they wanted them or not, or if this really made a big difference to either of them is unclear. I couldn't find much about their dynamic online, aside from the fact that she works as a school teacher and that sis had a little affair with the ice cream truck driver while her husband was on the road. When Peter finds out about this affair, he responds just as passively as he had to old boy down at the bar. He barely has a reaction at all. He forgives his wife. There is not much of a consequence for her infidelity. They simply just move forward as if it did not happen. Now, it could be because he was so passive and just not confrontational at all, and that's just what he gave as a person, or it could also be because he had been harboring a little secret infidelity of his own. You see, before he had even met his wife, he had been satisfying his curiosities, his crazy obsession with the women of the night, as well as some of his freaky little desires with the local sex workers. And it continued well after he had met and began dating Sonia, well into their marriage. And see, back in '69, he was not just paying for it. Well, he was trying to, but there was this incident in '69 where it just did not go as planned. This lady had actually tricked him out of his money, and instead of letting it go unavenged, and I'm not sure if unavenged is actually a word, but I'm sure you know what I mean, so my communication is effective and I don't want to hear it. So like I said, instead of letting it go unavenged, he decides to do something about it. Now, why this particular incident of him being shamed and humiliated was different than him being rained on down to the bar with a beer, I don't know. Maybe he was a coward and afraid to stand up for himself when it came to men and not women, or this could possibly have been the straw that broke Peter's back. I am unsure. But with this, he decides, you know what, I'm not going to just take this on the chin. Something has to be done. He is hell-bent on retribution. A couple of days later, he is in the car with his good friend Trevor when he believes he has spotted the woman who had tricked him out of his money. He tells Trevor to stop so he can approach the woman, gets out of the vehicle, and takes off down the street until Trevor can no longer even see him. Trevor, of course, thinks this whole thing is just weird, but he's just going to sit out in the car, wait on his friend to return. Meanwhile, Peter is now full on chasing this woman down the street. He runs her into a garage. She gets to the point where there is literally nowhere else to run nor hide. By this time, he has taken off one of his socks, put a stone inside of it, hits this woman over the head with it. Now, he realizes that this is not the woman who had actually stolen his money, but he proceeds to beat her some more anyway. He then leaves her there and goes back to Trevor's car. Now, Trevor is a bit taken aback by the fact that his sister's missing a sock and out of breath. Furthermore, the woman is nowhere in sight. Once Peter gets inside of the vehicle, he is yelling for Trevor to go. Just drive, just pull off and hurry up. But luckily, this woman, although very badly injured, she was still very much alive, and she manages to get to the street and take note of the license plate number before they pull off. The woman goes to the police with the report of the license plate and the incident, which of course leads them right to Trevor's door, and Trevor wasted no time rerouting them to Peter's door because he had nothing to do with any of it. When they get to Peter, he is adamant that yeah, he hit her, but he had only hit her with his hand. He didn't have a rock and a sock. That is not what happened. And luckily for him, the woman decides ultimately that she just does not want to pursue charges. So the incident does not go any further than being reported. Peter realizes how lucky he is that the woman does not pursue any charges for the attack. And he was quite shaken up by his little visit from the police. but he could not escape the feelings brought on by the attack itself. It gave him a rush that he had never felt before. He had never felt so powerful in his life. His obsession with the ladies of the night, it evolves into more than just fantasizing about them. The fantasies become very dark, very sinister, and he would daydream about hurting them. After this incident, his fantasies about these women, they become increasingly violent. But he is extremely hesitant to act on it because of how botched this first incident was. See, Peter had no intention of this woman surviving, so he was very shocked that she had done so and very spooked by the police showing up at his doorstep. Up until this point, he had done a very good job keeping up appearances with his wife and his few friends, and of course his family, and he felt like it just almost messed up everything. So for 6 years, he goes to work, comes home, and plays by all of the rules. Meanwhile, his urge to successfully carry out one of his little dark, twisted fantasies continues to haunt him. Finally, Peter decides that it's time to give himself a little bit of relief. Realizing that the old stone in the sock was not enough, he decides to trade that in for a hammer and a knife as a backup. July 5th of 1975, he goes out with his little hammer and his knife and decides that he is going to find himself a victim. He sees a young woman by the name of Anna walking alone down a dark, empty street, and he hasn't put much thought into what he wanted to do besides bludgeon her with his hammer. And so he approaches her from behind, striking her in the head, and once she is on the ground, he pulls out his knife and begins slashing her across the stomach. In the midst of the attack, he is disturbed by a resident and he flees the scene once he realized he had been spotted. This happened just in time. Anna was very badly injured, but she does survive the attack. As a result of what he had done to her, she has to have surgery. She is left with physical and emotional and psychological scars. Because of how people responded to her in public, they would stare, they will point at her sometimes. She said that she wished that she had just been killed during the ordeal because it would be better than the life that she had to live after the fact. Now, unfortunately though, it was too dark for her or the resident to get or give a really good detailed description of the assailant, and so they are pretty much left clueless as to who had done this. Peter is grateful that they are unable to get a good description of him, but he is extremely disappointed in himself because yet again another one of his targets has survived to tell the story. Unlike the first ordeal, this one does not scare him into hiding. He just decides that it's probably a better idea if he hunts for his targets further away from home, and he sees his job as a truck driver as the perfect opportunity. This same year, August 15th, he approaches a young woman by the name of Olive, and he briefly engages Olive in a conversation about the weather and small things like that. Very short, brief conversation, right? Then out of nowhere, he pulls out his hammer and begins striking her repeatedly. Then he slashes her a few times. And when she is unconscious, he begins disarranging her clothing. Now, it's unclear of where he was going with this because yet again, he is interrupted. And his target is left badly injured, but she is alive. In her interview with the investigators, aside the fact that he had a Yorkshire accent, there was not much detail that she had to give to them, and they didn't feel like that was of much importance. And so they are unable to identify him. They don't know who that could be. Just 12 days later, he spots a 14-year-old girl by the name of Tracy while he is out of town on one of his business trips. It is late at night and Tracy is walking down a road all by herself in the dark when he approaches her from behind, striking her 5 times in the head. After that 5th time, he sees the lights of an approaching vehicle, and so he takes off. Unfortunately for Tracy, although she is badly injured, she does survive the ordeal, which was completely unexpected for Peter. At this point, Peter is like, what the fuck? Because I have a whole hammer out here. Surely multiple blows with a hammer should cause some fatalities. But here I am just badly injuring people. Like, what's going on? He then vows to put a little bit more enthusiasm behind his blows. And on October 30th, just 3 days after the attack on Tracy, he sets eyes on a young mother of 4 children. Her children were really young. Their ages were like 2 to 7. He spots her one night walking alone and approaches her from behind using the same MO from the previous ladies, but the injuries that he inflicts on this woman were a lot more gruesome because, like I said, he was determined to take it all the way. And that is what he does. Afterward, there is no remorse whatsoever. It is actually quite the opposite. Instead, he felt a thrill that was greater than he had ever imagined it would be. He also feels a sense of pride in the fact that he had finally successfully carried out one of his fantasies in full. From here, his daydreaming goes from what he would like to do to one of these women to the things that he had actually done. These are the things that occupied his mental space when he was just seemingly staring into space. In private, he would rub one out while thinking of these things. Now, Peter had a disdain for all women. Women involved in sex work he particularly hated because he felt they were loose women and that they were dirty and filthy and all of that, right? And women who were not involved in any of the things, especially attractive women, he particularly disliked because these women he felt could have whatever they want because men would give it to them simply because they were attractive. And he was truly disgusted at the lengths that men will go to satisfy and please these women. He also did not like the fact that they were never interested in him. I think that's just where it starts and ends. Sis was just jealous and upset. After this discovery is made, there is a lot of pressure on police to find out who had done this. Over 150 officers were involved at some point during the investigation. And over 11,000 interviews were conducted with people who could have possibly been persons of interest. Now, while the block is hot, child, all of these interviews going on, and with his thirst being satisfied for the moment, he decides to lay low for a bit. For the last 2 months of 1975, he does not go out and attack anyone. No more discoveries are made. And no arrests are made either because they could not figure out who was responsible. By late January of 1976, his thirst has returned and it is too much for him to continue to ignore. At this point, he feels like it is worth the risk to go out and do this again. 42-year-old Emily Jackson, she was experiencing a financial hardship and was persuaded by her husband to go out and enter the world of sex work. Dear future husband, we gonna sell your ass before we sell mine. Just know that. Make no mistake about it, okay? But anyway, they decide that they are going to do this to bring in some income to earn a living. Emily is using the van that they own as a place to service her clients, and she is advertising outside of a local pub, and that is when she is spotted by Peter. Peter approaches her, invites her into his vehicle where he convinces her that they could, carry out their exchange, to which she agrees, and the two head down the road about a half a mile away from the pub. Peter hits her over the head, drags her from the vehicle, and stabs her over 51 times using a screwdriver. And he does not even stop there. He begins stomping her, and he stomps her so hard that it leaves the imprint of his boot in her thigh. Once he is convinced that the task is complete, he leaves her there, but miraculously, Emily survives this ordeal. However, yet again, no arrests are made and they have the slightest clue as to who had done this. Now, because she has survived, Peter decided, it's best if I just lay low again. So for 4 months, he does not go out on the hunt. He does not attack any women. But May 9th rolls around, and Peter spots a young 20-year-old woman who is walking down the street in the dark all by herself. She is actually walking home from a party, and he approaches her and offers her a ride. She accepts, and she is 4 months pregnant. She gets in the car and he is driving, but not long after he takes off, she is telling him that she has to urinate, and unfortunately she does not think that she can hold it until she gets to her destination. Now, he tells the lady that he will gladly pull over on the side of the road so that she could, relieve herself. But when she hops out of the car, so does he. He hits this young lady over the head from behind and leaves her there unconscious. She survives the ordeal, but unfortunately her baby does not. Now by this time, he wasn't really all that attracted or interested in his wife Sonia, which is what ultimately kind of led her into the arms of the ice cream man. But the two are still sharing a bed, and something really strange begins to happen in Peter's sleep. He begins having these crazy dramatic night terrors to which he would oftentimes react to physically, oftentimes disturbing Sonia's sleep. Each of these dreams will always be the same. They will begin with him attacking a woman. He is carrying out all of the fantasies, dark, twisted desires, and things that he would imagine doing to them. And then suddenly they would gain the upper hand and then morph into his mother and begin screaming at him, calling him a wicked son and a crazy perv who just deserved a bunch of torture and death. And Sonya would have to wake him up out of his sleep because he would be laying there sweating, trembling, crying even. And so she would always wake him up and try her best to comfort him, completely unaware of the nature of his nightmares. Now at this point, Peter is kind of feeling himself because although he kind of sucks as a serial killer, he is managing to get away with this time after time. So he decides that it's time to up the frequency on his little excursions. He also decides that sex workers will probably be easier targets because he knows where to find them, and it is much easier to convince her to get into his car versus just any old other woman. On October 5th of 1977, he picks up a young woman by the name of Irene and carries out his same MO. Unfortunately, she does not survive the attack. Now, with this crime scene, there were tire marks left behind that police felt confident would help them in their investigation. However, it does not lead to any arrests. Should have been helpful, but child, they were not able to identify who the car tracks could belong to. 2 months after this, another sex worker by the name of Patricia is found deceased in her apartment, and a bloody boot print is all that they have as far as evidence to go by. They were confident, but once again, they are unable to use it to identify or make any kind of arrests at all. They don't know whose bloody boot print this is. Then 2 months after this, on June 26th, a young 16-year-old girl by the name of Jane is found in a neighboring town. Now by this time, the police believe the known sex workers to be the victims of one man, completely separate from the women before them that had been attacked. And they felt that sex workers were mainly the targets, with them being the main subjects of all the latest attacks, right? But Jane was not involved in any type of sex work. And so this completely throws them for a loop. Child, when they appeal to the public to warn them that not just women that are involved in this type of work are targeted, that all women were potential victims, they referred to Lil Jane as his first innocent victim. Now I just thought that was the craziest thing. Like, what you mean first innocent victim? Peter's attacks, they continue in the same grisly nature as all the ones before, and it continues to go back and forth between the victim surviving and the victim not surviving well into 1977. They have dubbed him the Yorkshire Ripper, and they are still not close to uncovering his true identity. They don't know who this man is. Their first real break in the case comes with the discovery of a woman by the name of Jean Jordan. Now, they have found a $5 bill, or it's called a 5-pound bill over there, inside of her purse. And they figured that whoever had done this to her might have been a client of hers, and they may have given her this $5 bill. They were hoping that at the very least, he probably had a little bit of information that could give them some insight as to what had happened to her that day. Now, luckily, they are able to trace the bill to a specific bank and analyze the bank's operations to narrow it down to a potential 8,000 people that it could have been distributed to as a part of like a paycheck cashing that day. They interview 5,000 of those people, and Peter is actually in that number. But Peter has a little alibi. He said he was at a family party, and so he could not have been involved with this lady on this day. His alibi checks out when somebody corroborates his claims, and he is cleared as a person of interest. Weeks of investigating leads to nothing, and police are very frustrated that yet again they have found what they thought would be a very helpful clue, yet they failed to get anywhere with it. Meanwhile, women are still being discovered and attacked. One woman by the name of Marilyn, who survives, goes to the police and she tells them what happened to her, and she gives a fully detailed description of the man that had attacked her. This physical description matches Peter perfectly. She pretty much just describes him down to a T. Furthermore, the tire tracks found at the scene of the crime matched the tire tracks from a previous crime. And so they knew that this had to be their guy. Between Peter being in the number of the people who could have received that $5 bill on payday, the fact that he physically matches the description perfectly, and them now finding out that his vehicle's tires matches those that are found at both scenes, they're starting to believe that Peter is for sure their guy. They bring him down to the station several times for questioning, but they never have enough evidence to hold him. And he himself has an alibi every time, one that his wife Sonia is always ready to confirm. Peter is brought in a total of 9 times and they are unable to connect him to any of these crimes. 1979 rolls around and it is a very interesting year for Peter. He had lost his mother, the one person in the world who he felt like knew him the most, although nobody truly knew Peter. But she was the closest to somebody actually knowing him. And so him losing her, it really did hurt. But with that loss came the end of his nightmares. Maybe he was so afraid that she would find out what he was up to, and that's why he was having them. And when she was gone, he had nothing else to fear. By this time, the ladies of the night were taking extra precautions. A lot of them were no longer working directly on the street, and those who were, they were out there in groups and they were looking out for each other. Everyone was on high alert, making it much more difficult for him to get his hands on his next victim. By this time, police were absolutely sure that he was their guy, but they just could not figure out a way to catch him. They could not get their hands on little Peter. They do, however, manage to arrest him for driving under the influence in April of 1980. And by now, them not being able to catch him gives him all of the confidence. He is let out, but while waiting on his court date for his DUI, he manages to kill 2 more women and attack 3 others. Meanwhile, in 1980, Peter's little friend Trevor, remember him? He comes forward to the police and he tells them that he is almost sure that his good friend Peter is the person that they are looking for. Trevor even recalls the incident in which Peter hopped out of his car in pursuit of a woman that he believed had stolen some money from him. And now he had come back to the vehicle all out of breath, huffing and puffing, and the woman was nowhere in sight. He files a formal report detailing all of this, and unfortunately, this report gets lost in the shuffle amongst all of the other tips and reports about who the Yorkshire Ripper could be. On the 2nd of January in 1981, Peter is with a 24-year-old sex worker who he had picked up under the guise that he was going to solicit some of her services when 2 police officers approach his parked car. The car that he is in has false plates, and so for this, they are able to make an arrest. He is brought down to the station on this minor charge, but while they have him down here, they decide to press him about the Yorkshire Ripper cases. Peter is being very evasive, very dismissive of their claims, and he is saying he don't know what they're talking about at all. When they are getting nowhere with this, they decide to take a closer look inside of the vehicle and see if there is anything inside that could be of help to them. And sure enough, they find a hammer, a knife, and some rope. When Peter is confronted with this, he then asks them if he could just go use the restroom right quick. Now, Peter does not have to use the restroom at all. When he goes into the bathroom, he takes a knife that he had on him, puts it inside of the water reservoir of the toilet because he figured, they might be about to search me. I can't have this on me. This is just going to look even worse. Unfortunately for him, though, they find it there. They decide at this point to do a whole strip search of Peter and see what else he could be hiding on him or inside of him, child, as far as their little fingers can reach. You know what was weird about what they found during the strip search? Peter, underneath his pants, had on a V-neck sweater upside down, like his legs were through the arms, and so the V-neck of the sweater exposed his little private area, and they felt like he did this so it would be easily accessible. But it's like, why wouldn't you just go without drawers, sir? Like, I'm so confused as to why he had that V-neck sweater on his legs like that. Like, ridiculousness. At this point, Peter realizes that his chances of evading justice are pretty slim. Yet he still holds out for 2 more days being interrogated until finally he confesses that he is their guy. Now at this point, they were like, well, we need to bring little Sonia in for a little piece of questioning too. But he did not want the news to come from them. He told them that he would give them a full confession, but he wanted to be able to break the news to Sonia himself. So per his request, they bring her down to the station to have a conversation with her husband, in which he tells her that he had done all of this, but not because he wanted to, but because he was a tool of God's will and heard the voice of God himself. He and Sonia both claimed that she had no idea that he was behind this beforehand and that she was completely shocked. Peter said that Sonia had never seen any shred of evidence. She never saw any blood on clothes. She never saw anything because he made sure of it. He also said that because he spent so much time on the road, it kind of justified the fact that they really didn't spend a whole lot of time together, and he used his time out on the road to carry out most of these acts. So it didn't seem like anything out of the norm was going on. After he comes clean to Sonia, he spends an entire day confessing to everything that he had done, going over each crime in detail. Now, he also told the police the same thing he told Sonia, that he was hearing the voices of God who told him to do all of the things, girl, and he had no choice but to be used by God. Now, his lawyer decided to use this as an opportunity to enter a not guilty by reason of insanity plea. He also tried to paint the picture that his client was a paranoid schizophrenic, and so he should not be held fully responsible. But unfortunately for Peter and his lawyer, he is deemed sane and completely competent enough to stand trial. During his 2-week trial, his lawyer continues to try to push the narrative that his client is not guilty on the grounds of diminished responsibility, and that Peter was in fact mentally ill, but the jury was not trying to hear that, child. They find him guilty and he is given 20 life sentences. The judge said that he felt like Peter was beyond redemption. It was no hope for little Peter, child, and he just hopes that Peter never gets out of prison. He put in his recommendation of 30 years to be served before it is even considered that he can get out on parole. Now, after Peter is found guilty and sent to jail, I guess he just figured he might as well just come clean about the rest. He confesses to more crimes that he committed, but it was decided that prosecution for these offenses was not in public interest, and so he is not charged for these crimes. Even though he had been found mentally fit to stand trial, in 1984 he is diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. They then transfer him to a psychiatric hospital. 10 years later, his wife decides to just go ahead and divorce him, move on with her life. And child, he had the worst little time in prison because a lot of the other inmates didn't like him for the type of crimes he committed, and so they would just attack him all the time. One of these attacks that happened in 1997 left Sis blind in one eye. 10 years after that, he was attacked again, and this prisoner told him that he was about to blind the other eye. They just did not respect the fact that he targeted women, and especially some teens. It just wasn't a good look for him behind those prison walls. In 2016, they found that he was either not really mentally ill or not mentally ill no more, and decided to transfer him back to a regular prison, which he stayed in until November of 2020, just last year. Sis called the Rona, and it took him out of here at the ripe old tender age of 74. Sonia actually came forward and held a secret funeral for her ex-husband. She felt like he deserved that much. I don't know why, but she felt that way. She didn't even invite any of his family, and they were very pissed about it because they felt like they deserved to come and have that closure. They were not happy at all about not being involved in his ceremony. And that is pretty much the end of the story of Peter Sutcliffe. He was a horrible little man. Y'all don't forget to give my video a like on the way out, okay? I'll be seeing y'all exiting without liking. As always, comment your thoughts down below on this case. I really do want to know what y'all think about little old Gemini Peter. Share this video with a friend. As always, I appreciate you so much for spending your time with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace. Child, my children in the background just doing a lot. See, before he had even met Sonia, is that her name? Did I say her name was Sonia? What the hell is this woman's name? She is being followed by Trevor. Not Trevor, girl. Trevor in the car. He felt extremely empowerated. I just got up and I realized Bella really just took poop back here. Y'all didn't even tell me she was back there doing it. Women involved in says, girl, what an ex. That he could be, what? That he could be, what was that? And them now finding out that his tire, in 1979 rolls down, girl, what? To catch him, they could not get their hands on little Peter. That sounds kind of nasty. When Peter is confronted with them, strip search him. Blue godly. Child, at this point, Peter realizes that the gig is up. Or is it the jig? The jig is up, I'm sure. He also, of course, said that because she He also said because she did. Child, this video was longer than the last 10 minutes of work. I feel like my mouth is so dry.